So people take on a lot of different roles in their life. You might be married, you might be a parent, you might be an employee, and most of those roles that you take on, you have usually some degree of control over. So you choose your partner, you choose your job, and even if it's something kind of unexpected like becoming a parent, you still usually have at least 8 or 9 months to prepare for that role. But caregiving for an older person is one of these roles that is kind of unexpected. Nobody really ever plans on becoming a caregiver, but it's also not a very uncommon role. I'm Beth Fauth. I'm an associate professor of human development and family studies at Utah State University. So my department covers development across the lifespan, so starting with infancy all the way through adulthood. And my area is at the end of life, so late life, older adults. My department also covers family relationships, and the relationship that I focus on is family caregivers of people with dementia. So what I'm trying to do is look for ways to make family caregivers' lives easier and really optimize their role as a family caregiver. And I hope that people that watch this talk will understand that family members that are caring for somebody with dementia are under quite a bit of stress. I hope that they know that there are resources available to them and that it's okay to ask for help and to get a break. And I hope that they understand the science behind it, that we know that these programs really work. People often ask me what the difference is between Alzheimer's and dementia, and it's a very good question. So dementia is considered an umbrella term. Like there's a lot of different kinds of dementia, and Alzheimer's is just the most common type. So 60 to 80% of all dementias are caused by Alzheimer's disease. So a lot of people say that Americans don't take care of their old people. They place their loved ones in nursing homes, and that is absolutely a myth. So at any given time, there's only 5% of people over the age of 65 living in nursing homes or assisted living. And my students usually think it's between 40 to 50%, and really it's only 5%. So what that means is that the majority of older people are living at home, and if they need care, that care is almost always provided by a family member. So the majority of caregivers, actually 70% of caregivers, have no paid help at all. 40% of caregivers are actually doing what we call high intensity caregiving. So they are not just doing these quick visits with mom, to check in, but they're doing things like feeding, bathing, dressing, sometimes even lifting people out of bed. So it's really important for us to recognize both the large numbers of people that are family caregivers and also the really high intensity work that they're doing. Caring for somebody with Alzheimer's is really difficult. So I mentioned some of the daily care that they need, like eating, feeding, dressing. But there's also some behavior symptoms that people with Alzheimer's have that also makes it pretty difficult. So they may be asking the same questions over and over. They may feel agitated. Even in their own home, they're kind of confused. So all these things make it much more difficult. So the way that we collect the data to evaluate programs is that we have caregivers enrolled in programs either online or face-to-face with a counselor. They fill out a survey where they rate their own symptoms, so how much depressive symptoms they've had in a week. They also rate the symptoms of the person that they care for. So are you exposed to these kinds of behaviors, and how stressed are you by these behaviors? And so we have them fill out those surveys at the beginning before they start the intervention, and then maybe midway through and after, and then usually follow up. So we want to see if these things are sustained over time. And then we just do some statistical analysis where we show, what do things look like? Is it flat, meaning nothing changed? They were enrolled in the program, but we didn't see any kind of movement in their symptoms. Or hopefully we show that, they're less stressed by the symptoms that they've been exposed to, or their depressive symptoms have decreased from before they started the program. We did a study in Utah where we were measuring the frequency of the symptoms of dementia, and we also measured the well-being of the caregiver. We were actually pretty surprised to find that we could predict with up to 72% accuracy whether the caregiver had clinically significant depressive symptoms based only on whether these symptoms were present or absent. So the reason why that's surprising is because depressive symptoms can be caused by a lot of things. And so the fact that these behavioral symptoms were contributing so much towards depression was really surprising to us. So most people assume that it's providing the care that is difficult. And yes, it can be. But really, a study that I worked on showed that it was actually resisting that care. That was what was predictive of caregiver stress and depressive symptoms. So caregivers could feed and bathe and dress their loved one, but when the person with dementia showed resistance, like they were agitated with that care, it was that behavior that actually predicted caregiver stress and depressive symptoms. Caregivers almost always report that they want to do this job. They really enjoy keeping their loved one at home, and they appreciate that they're providing really good quality care. And most caregivers can report at least one positive benefit for their job. So caregiving can be a really difficult role. I mean, you're with somebody with these symptoms 24 hours a day. On top of that, you're losing the relationship with this person that you've known and loved for a really long time, and that absolutely adds to the difficulty of this. One of the interesting things about caregivers is that even if they're providing care for their family member 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they often don't identify themselves as a caregiver. So they think of themselves as a son that's caring for mom, or as a wife that's caring for her husband. It's just something you do for someone that you love. And so because it's something you would naturally do, you generally don't ask for help. So I generally think that's why caregivers don't know that they can or should ask for help. I think about when I became a parent for the first time. I had my daughter. There may be some things that pop up, like she's having a hard time sleeping. And I had no problem at all calling my sisters, asking my friends that had kids, for advice, looking on the internet for resources. It just seemed completely natural to reach out for advice and for information. And for some reason, people who are caring for someone with dementia just don't think of doing that. They don't really reach out to others. They often feel like they are the only people in this role. And they often don't want to burden other family members by suggesting that it's difficult. And so they really just don't reach out and get the resources that they might need. So this is the focus of my research. This is what I love to do. I design programs for caregivers of people with dementia, and then I evaluate them to make sure that they work. So the programs might have things like education about Alzheimer's disease and what to expect, and they almost always have some kind of stress or coping training involved to help caregivers, manage these really difficult conditions. Educating caregivers is really important because once they understand what's going on inside the brain of somebody with dementia, it may make them a little more able to understand the symptoms that they're seeing and a little bit less frustrated when those symptoms come up. So if they see an image of the brain where you can see lots of damage, lots of neurons that are damaged, it can really help them feel like, oh, this is why the person with dementia is behaving the way they are. It's not because they just aren't trying hard enough or they're kind of being difficult on purpose. The behaviors of people with dementia are just a lot less frustrating when you understand what's going on inside the brain. So another really important part of an intervention for caregiver is giving them a break from that role. We call that respite. Caregivers really need to have some kind of regular time away from the person with dementia so they can be themselves and sort of feel like they can recover a bit. And so this is where friends or neighbors could come in and maybe sit with their loved one for a few hours and get a break, or they could enroll in some kind of intervention program that offers respite. Either way, the research has shown that this is a really effective way of reducing stress in caregivers. We need to find ways to take this role off of just one person. So for whatever reason, in dementia care, there's usually one primary caregiver that does the majority of the work. It may be the spouse, or it might be the child that lives the closest. It might be the child that has the most flexible schedule. But either way, it's usually one person doing the vast majority of the work. So I worked on an intervention where we had caregivers meet with their family members with a counselor, and they sat down and they talked about different ways those family members could help the primary caregiver. So they could come, sit with mom for a while, or they could offer to pay for housekeeping services. That might be for somebody that isn't even in the area but still wants to help. But the most important thing is that we try to get caregivers to recognize this is not a job that they can really do alone. One of the most essential things in a caregiver intervention is helping to teach caregivers how to manage their stress, and there's a lot of options. There's a lot of ways to do this. It could be through therapy, it could be through support groups, could be through calling organizations like the Alzheimer's Association and getting connected with a counselor there. Whatever they decide to do, the stress management piece is really important. One of my most recent projects was a study where we had an online supportive service offered to dementia caregivers where we were teaching them effective coping skills online without a therapist. So they worked through these different training sessions that taught them some skills in acceptance and commitment therapy, which there's a lot of aspects to that intervention, but what we were really trying to do is help caregivers not really avoid the difficult emotions that they're experiencing in this role, but to become comfortable with those and to try to live according to the values that they felt were most important to them despite this really difficult role. The intervention also included some mindfulness, like breathing exercises, and helped them focus on the present instead of on the past or on the future. Caregivers might not know, but there's a lot of resources available to them. They could call the Alzheimer's Association or visit their website. It's a very high quality resource. They can call their area agency on aging. So that's an office. Every county has one, and they have information on support groups and other resources. So it's one thing to know that there are resources available, but what I hope caregivers know and what my research can support is that these programs really work. It's exciting to know that they work sort of both over the short term, right after the caregiver works through maybe some of these classes, but also over the long term. So we're able to show sustained benefits over a long time. So my hope is that caregivers will be encouraged by this, that they will go out and seek these resources that are available to them, knowing, with some confidence that these are good programs.
I'm Shawn Whiteman. I'm a professor of Human Development and Family Studies and the Associate Dean for Research in the Emma Eccles-Jones College of Education and Human Services. In the fields of developmental psychology and family science, research on sibling relationships has lagged behind other close relationships. In fact, a recent analysis revealed that less than 3% of the literature on close relationships is about siblings. This gap in knowledge is surprising given that more than 80% of youth in the United States grow up with a sibling in their home. What is particularly surprising about this neglect is that it generally flies in the face of the popular press. In fact, sibling relationships are prime topics for magazines, books, and other popular press sources. So, sibling relationships are important because they're the longest lasting family relationship we'll have. As I said earlier, most youth in the United States grow up with siblings. And in Utah, we're especially likely to have siblings. We have the largest family size in the country. So youth in Utah are more likely to reside in homes with multiple siblings. And brothers and sisters, both older and younger, shape development. In this Blue Plate Research talk, I will talk about the various ways in which brothers and sisters shape each other's behaviors, as well as shape their parents' expectations and attitudes, how a sibling can increase or decrease an adolescent's likelihood of engaging in risky substance use like alcohol and marijuana, and how my research can be used to develop interventions and prevention programs to support healthy sibling relationships and promote healthy decision making. But before we get to these points, I'm going to provide you with a personal anecdote that led me to how I'm talking with you today. This is how my sister shaped my development. My sister and I are 22 months apart in age, but we were always one grade apart in school. This was because of the way our birthdays fell around the school cutoffs. Growing up, my sister and I were similarly academically adept, but I'll admit I did not work terribly hard in high school. When my sister returned home from her first year in college, we learned that she was not invited back for her second year. My naive read of the situation at the time was, college must be really hard because my bright and capable sister did not do well. After dealing with the fallout of that summer, including some really difficult, intense family relationships, I went to college motivated to do well. I studied and prepared for the classes in the first time of my life, and I performed well. Professors recognized my efforts and performance and encouraged me to get involved in research. This led me to a path to pursuing a graduate degree with their encouragement, something that I didn't know was an option at the time. My sister's experience was indirect, but a critical factor that led me to a career in research and motivated some of my interest in studying sibling relationships today. One of the ways that siblings can influence each other is through their indirect effect on the family and family system. Siblings provide one another with sources of social comparison by which they can compare their achievements, abilities, and the ways they're treated by their parents. Another way that siblings influence each other is through their indirect influence on the family and their parents. For example, one line of my work examines how older siblings shape parents' expectations and parenting behaviors of their younger siblings. In short, across these studies, we found that parents who had already parented an adolescent, that is an older sibling, had more optimistic and realistic expectations about their younger children's teenage years. Further, we found that parents reported less conflict with their younger children and had more knowledge of their everyday activities as compared to the older siblings when they were measured at the same age. Taking advantage of our longitudinal studies where we study families over time, we're able to compare parents' experiences with multiple children when they're the same age. For example, in year 1, we could study the experiences with John, who was 13, and 2 years later, we could study the experiences with his younger sibling, Jim, who was 11 in year 1, but now 13 in year 3. And by doing these types of comparisons, we can show what parents' relationships are like with their kids when they're the same chronological age. And across these studies, we found that parents have generally more positive relationships with younger siblings when they're the same age, meaning they have less conflict and they have more knowledge about those younger children's activities and school performance. Another line of my work looks at whether the presence or absence of a sibling affects family dynamics. Most often, this type of work is studied when a newborn is introduced into the family home. In my work, taking advantage of our longitudinal studies with adolescents, we study the opposite. What happens when an older sibling leaves the family home for the first time, and what happens to the family dynamics for those who remain home? In one study, we found that following an older sibling's departure, parent-child conflict actually increased for the child who remained home. Why? Well, here are some quotes from those children. "She's been paying more attention to me. Schoolwork, what I'm doing. It's kind of odd to be under the more watching eye. Yeah, more of the focus has shifted to me. I think there's more attention from my parents, which is sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing. Well, they talk to me more about school, running, sports, and friends and things. It seems like they're into my life." In the psychological and sociological literatures on family size, there's a hypothesis called the resource dilution hypothesis. This hypothesis states as family size increases, parental capital is spread more thinly across those children. In the present example, we propose the inverse. As the number of children in the family shrinks, parental capital is freed to be reallocated across those remaining siblings. In fact, in another study, my colleagues and we found that younger siblings' receipt of attention and companionship, time spent with parents, increased, as did their receipt of privileges and material goods. Many of these changes were associated with positive changes in their adjustment, such as increased GPA. Another way that siblings influence one another is through their direct interactions with each other. Research reveals that in childhood and early adolescence, siblings spend more time with each other than any other relational partner outside of school hours. It is in these settings that children learn, practice, and engage in behaviors with their brothers and sisters. In addition to serving as companions, social partners, and playmates, siblings can also serve as models, advisors, or even foils for one another during adolescence. It is in these two areas that my current work on sibling influences on adolescents' alcohol and other substance use behaviors is focused. Funded by the National Institutes of Health, we're working to identify the various ways in which siblings shape each other's substance use behaviors in adolescence and beyond. To do this work, we recruit families with multiple adolescent siblings from across the nation. For the most part, we interview family members over the phone or via surveys over the internet, and we follow them for a number of years, which is called a longitudinal study. Now, it's important to note that most research on siblings and sibling relationships focuses only on one dyad. And in most cases, that's focusing on a dyad of consecutively born siblings or those that are closest together in age. Clearly, studying one dyad does not represent all possible dyads and all possible sibling influences within a family, but this is done largely for methodological reasons. For example, it would be very difficult and take a long time and require multiple methodologies to study the 36 different sibling dyads that existed among the 9 Osmond children when they were growing up. In our research on teen substance use, including alcohol and marijuana, we found that younger siblings are more than twice as likely to engage in alcohol and marijuana use if their older brother or sister has engaged in those same behaviors in the past year. Importantly, this effect of siblings is unique, above and beyond the influence of parents and peers, and the size of the effect is greater than that of the size of parents and on a par with peers who are considered normally the most important influence on adolescent substance use behaviors. We further found that similarity in sibling substance use is especially likely when younger siblings report looking up to or wanting to be like their older sibling, or perhaps modeling them. In contrast, when younger siblings reported wanting to be different or trying to be different from their older siblings, there was no association between the older siblings' substance use behaviors and their subsequent behaviors. How do older siblings influence younger siblings' substance use behaviors beyond serving as models? Another set of studies shows that older siblings are key in shaping younger siblings' expectations about substances. For example, having an older sibling who drinks alcohol is associated with younger siblings having more positive expectations about alcohol, that they think alcohol will be fun and provide more social opportunities. Those expectancies in turn are associated with a greater likelihood of use. Another way that siblings shape each other's health risk behaviors is by introducing their brothers and sisters to the settings and companions in which those activities occur. We found that older siblings are critical sources who provide access to substances and substance-using peers, which again is positively related to teens' alcohol and other substance use. The COVID-19 pandemic is an especially interesting time to study sibling influences. Following the abrupt closures to schools and other societal institutions like sports teams, siblings were spending more time at home with each other, with limited in-person interactions with peers. Because adolescents typically consume alcohol with peers and access to peers was greatly limited during COVID-19, at least in-person access, it's possible that siblings may become especially important in shaping each other's drinking behaviors. In new research that's currently under review, we found that sibling influences were indeed elevated. In recently published work, we also found that nearly 1 in 6 parents newly allowed their adolescent children to drink alcohol in the family home during the COVID-19 pandemic. Importantly, parents were equally likely to let their older and younger children drink alcohol during this time. Although this may not seem like a sibling effect, it is likely the result of parents not wanting to treat their children differently. And it has the side effect of introducing their younger children to alcohol at an earlier age, which is related to greater substance use problems over time. Throughout this presentation, hopefully I've convinced you that siblings uniquely shape each other's development, relationships, and health. This is important because siblings provide an important and unique context for intervention and prevention efforts aimed at promoting health and reducing substance use. Family relationship education programs and intervention programs focused on sibling relationships, however, provide a non-threatening entry point into family development and substance use prevention. So the findings from our research can be used to develop relationship education programming and intervention programming to help families improve sibling relationships and ultimately mitigate adolescent health risk behaviors. These programs will benefit parents by reducing conflict in the home, promoting more harmonious relationships, and ultimately providing a more supportive family environment.
On your wedding day, chances are the last thing you're thinking about is divorce. Your focus is on the happiness of the moment and the hope of a happily ever after. Probably the last thing you're thinking about is who else you may marry later in your life and whether you'll be raising his or her kids. And yet for many Utahns, both divorce and remarriage may be a reality. Hello, my name is Brian Higginbotham. I am a professor in the Human Development and Family Studies Department, and I'm also an extension specialist with Utah State University's Extension Service. Today I will talk about our divorce and stepfamily education programs, the associated research, and a number of practical tips. My extension programs and the associated research help individuals who are at the crossroads of divorce, as well as those who are already in complex family structures. Every year there are around 13,000 divorces in Utah. The law in Utah requires divorcing parents with minor children to receive divorce education, courses that are designed to sensitize them to the impacts divorce may have on their children's life and how to help them adjust. As the land-grant university, the courts partner with the USU to help offer these classes so that they are available statewide and online. We teach research-based information that covers a host of different topics. The first includes age-appropriate ways to talk about divorce with your kids, like what you should tell them and what you should not tell them. For example, young kids need to understand that they will be splitting their time between 2 homes, but they really don't need to know all the reasons behind the divorce. The second are parental behaviors that help promote good self-esteem. For example, it's really important that kids hear and feel that your love and commitment to them has never changed. It is also important for them to be able to express freely the feelings that are going on in their hearts and minds. We also discuss how and why conflict creates stress for children and how to minimize the amount of conflict that children are exposed to. Utah's course is only 1 hour, whereas some states require multiple hours for divorcing parents. When we first started, there was some concern about how much we could really fit into a 1-hour course and how effective it would be. We administer the course through USU Extension, which allows us as scholars to also research the impacts of the program. For example, in one study, we examined the question, is 1 hour enough for divorce education? The majority of respondents said it was, and yet for a sizable minority, it wasn't. They either felt that it was too long or that it was not even close to being enough. Yet statistically, the outcomes for participants were positive. So regardless of whether they were satisfied or dissatisfied with the length of the course, they still reported improvements on the targeted outcomes. Participants reported that after taking this 1-hour course, they plan to avoid arguing with the co-parent in front of the children, avoid saying negative things about the other parent in front of their child, and also avoid questioning their child about the other parent's behaviors. So, not having them be a spy. One of the anecdotal findings from our research was the participants' interest in resources related to future relationships. In the case that they ever were to remarry or recouple. Which made me think of the old adage, remarriage is the triumph of hope over experience. People may give up on marriage to a specific partner, but most do not give up on marriage entirely. Most still aspire to finding a committed lifelong partner. Of course, entering the dating scene later in life can be tricky. And if you already have children from a previous relationship, a new relationship means a stepfamily, which comes with a host of additional complexities. But with the right tools, stepfamilies can be highly rewarding. And to that end, one of my other extension programs is called Smart Steps for Stepfamilies. This course is also offered virtually so that individuals in rural and urban communities can access it through our website, healthyrelationshipsutah.org. In this program, we teach evidence-based strategies that facilitate stepfamily success. What is really cool is that these strategies are informed by the research that we are doing with Utah stepfamilies. I'll highlight a couple of strategies that are key according to our research. First, adopt a positive view of stepfamily life. Yeah, stepfamilies come with a lot of extra complexities, but they also come with a lot of other extras. Grandparents, uncles, aunts, and other support networks that can provide additional support to you and your children. Second, set realistic expectations for stepfamily development. As a kid, I would sing, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes baby in a baby carriage. Not so for stepfamilies. By definition, stepfamilies are born when a couple already has kids. But just because there is an instant family doesn't mean that there will be instant love. There's trust that has to be earned, rapport to be established, and positive memories to be created. As a general rule of thumb, the age of the child when the parent remarries or repartners may be the amount of time it takes for them to come to view or love or accept that step-parent as a parent. Of course, it can be shorter or longer, and the key is whether the step-parent develops a one-on-one relationship with that child. This leads to the third strategy, which I will call the spider web. A spider doesn't just string one individual strand. A strong and effective spider web includes multiple strands with multiple connections. Likewise, in a step family, adults need to make regular and meaningful connections with each child. So a family trip to Disneyland once a year is great, but it doesn't substitute the impact of individualized one-on-one time with kids. We have to remember that for many kids, love is spelled T-I-M-E. My last research-based tip is to establish positive co-parenting relationships with the ex and try to avoid having the kids be caught in the middle of any ongoing drama. Those that take our classes report statistically significant improvements on this knowledge and skills related to stepfamily success. But behind these encouraging statistics and all the published reports, there are literally thousands of individuals, kids, families, whose lives are better because of Utah State University's extension programs. For example, one youth shared, "We play more and fight less." And then there was the parent who reported, "I finally realized that just going to the doctor isn't enough time with the children. I think we're going to set a night aside as a family night to play some games, no TV. We went and bought a kitchen table so we can sit as a family to eat." As I reflect on my programming and research, I want people to know that USU is here to help, not just for students, but for all Utahns who are looking for education and self-improvement.